Spotty gotta do? What?
Welcome again, it's your boy Japanese Tutor back at it again with another endgame video. This time we're going to cover the opposite colored bishop endgame and how to tackle that. And so you know that we're following Dvoretsky's endgame manual. The link is going to be down below. Now, if you do learn anything from this video, consider giving me a subscribe and liking the video. If something's bad or you didn't learn enough, let me know what I can cover next time that might interest you. Thank you in advance. All right, so here's right from the text. Ending, so the opposite color bishop endings. And we're going to go over the most important rules. Endings with opposite colored bishops are perhaps the most strategic of them all. Most strategic. So a lot of people think that opposite colored bishop endgames are actually drawn right from the start. But actually they require the most calculating. You need to calculate a lot to do opposite colored bishop endgames. It's not just, oh, it's opposite colored bishop, it's automatically a draw. No, play it out. Make sure that it is a draw before you decide so, because there are a lot of determining factors. So Dvoretsky's studies of these endings have taught him some rules which will help us get our bearings in nearly all endings. So drawing tendencies. Here, it is frequently possible to save oneself or 2 or 3 pawns down. So even if you are 2, 3 pawns down, you can still save yourself sometimes. The consequences of this rule are obvious. The stronger side must be exceptionally alert, whether going to an opposite color bishop endgame or playing one out. Here, it doesn't take long to stumble on a drawing counter chance. And for the weaker side, going to the opposite bishop ending is sometimes the key to his salvation, sharply increasing the chances for a favorable outcome. Okay. The fortress. This is rule number 2. The fortress. The main theme of opposite colored bishop endings is that of the fortress. The weaker side strives to create one. The stronger side strives to prevent its formation, or if it already exists, to try to find a way to break through. An important factor in endgame play is the ability to analyze a position logically, to think through various plans and schemes. Logical thinking is one of the special importance in endings with opposite colored bishop. Okay. Actually, and that goes for all of chess. If you have a logical mind, say, hey, this piece already moved. I don't want to move it again in the opening. Oh, this piece is really well placed. Now let me focus on my other pieces instead of moving this piece over and over and over again. So just logical thinking overall in chess is beneficial. Okay. In the majority of cases, such endings are not played as much as they are constructed. First, it is necessary to determine the configuration of pawns and pieces, which will render the position impenetrable. Only then can we proceed with the calculation of variations which will prove whether or not we can attain a desired configuration and whether it is impenetrable, in fact. The following rules show the most important techniques for setting up and breaking down fortresses. Pawn placement is rule number 3. In the preceding chapter, the chapter we just did, we considered the principle that required us to place our pawns on the opposite color squares from that controlled by our bishop. Yes, yes, mate. In opposite colored bishop endings, this principle only holds true for the stronger side. It is especially important with connected pass pawns. Okay, so let's read this one more time because this is kind of like vital information, and try to remember this one. This one's really, really important. Okay, in the preceding chapter, we considered the principle that required us to place our pawns on the opposite color squares from that controlled by our bishop. So if we have a dark squared bishop, put our pawns on light squares. Very important, especially if you are on the winning side, if you're on the stronger side. Okay? Now, but the weaker side must, contrary to the general rule, keep his pawns on the same color squares as his own bishop. In that event, he will usually be able to defend them. In fact, a pawn defended by its bishop can only be attacked by the enemy king, which renders it invulnerable. You guys got that? If you're in an opposite color bishop endgame, they have a light square bishop, you have a dark square bishop, and you have, let's say, 2 pawns, they have 4 pawns. Put your pawns on the same color square as your bishop to try to create a fortress. Because those pawns in the dark squares can only be attacked by the enemy king. This is gold right here. Okay. In other types of endgames, such a pawn could be attacked not just by the king, but also by other pieces, such as a knight, a bishop of the same color. So only do this rule when you have opposite colored bishops. Rule number 4. Positional nuances are worth more than material. When we are playing an opposite bishop ending, the numbers of pawns on the board frequently have less significance than a small alteration in the placement of pieces or pawns, even an apparently insignificant one. Therefore, in opposite colored bishop endgames, we quite frequently encounter positional pawn sacrifices. Number 5, the one diagonal principle. We have already met this principle in the bishop versus pawns endgame in chapter 4, the chapter we did last chapter. Okay. So, for both the stronger and the weaker side, it is very important that the bishop should both defend its own and stop the enemy pawns without tearing. That is, along one and the same diagonal. So do not attack. So try to defend on that one diagonal. Okay, next. Rule number 6. Pawns in the crosshairs. A typical means of defense is for the bishop to attack the enemy pawns. This will either force their advance to the less favorable squares of the color of their own bishop, or tie the enemy king to the pawn's defense. This technique, like the previous one, in opposite bishop endgames, are used frequently. The logical thing would be to illustrate each of these rules by concrete examples. Now, this would be kind of difficult, only because they are rarely employed separately. Consider the following simple endgame. You will see all of the rules we have been talking about appearing simultaneously. So here, it is white to move. So I'm going to give you about 2 minutes. Try to digest some of the information that I said and come up with an answer. 2 minutes. And let's put on some music for you guys. All right, so thank you for trying to solve it if you did. If not, and you just say, hey, Japanese tutor, knock, knock, I just want to see the answer. I'll show you that one too. So I'm going to go over some of the things that the chat had to say first. So one said King G4, which I don't believe is correct because of just C7, King C7. But I think this is the more accurate, C5 was also mentioned. All right, so once you play C5, then you attack here. So let's see if we can. Okay. Okay. So you're attacking here, forcing the pawn to move, and then the king sits here or here very nicely, and then the bishop just goes along this diagonal and never stops moving. Right. You can play the king to e4, never has to move from e4. Then you protect your bishop. You protect the pawn on h3 with the bishop on that g4 to c8 diagonal. Thus, white was able to save himself. 3 pawns down. 3 pawns. The final position is a fortress in which the weaker side's only pawn is properly placed on the same color as its own bishop. The bishop defends its pawn on h3 and holds the enemy pawns at g5 and f6 on the same diagonal. White sacrificed the pawn so that attacking the enemy's sole well-placed pawn at e6, he could force its advance to a dark square, after which the pawns could be easily blockaded. Analyzing almost any endgame in this chapter, you will see some or all of the just formulated rules in action. So that's actually pretty cool. All right, and let me just make a new one. I'm sorry about that. Great. So I'm going to set up a new position. And now we're going to cover bishops and 2 connected pawns versus bishop. All right, so let's make a new study. And I've seen this example before. Okay. So it is black to move. Careful analysis of the following basic theoretical position will familiarize us with the characteristic ideas of such endgames. So right now, white threatens e5, e6, followed by king e5, and then here. Right, that's what he's threatening. To stop this plan, black must take the e6 square under control with his bishop, but from d7 or from b3. Let's examine both choices. On bishop b3, the position is lost. First, white gives a probing check to see which way the enemy king goes. It is important to have the bishop preventing him from getting in between the pawns after e5, e6. Therefore, bishop g5. Then the white king goes to help the e pawn. For example, if they play king f7, then king d4. Okay, king d4, bishop a2. Oops, sorry. King d4, bishop a2. King c5, bishop b3. King d6. and e6 check, where you cannot sacrifice it because now I can just take it, and my king supports the pawn push. Okay. As soon as the pawns are blocked on the same color squares as their bishop, the draw becomes obvious. So with his bishop on b3, black loses, but he gets an easy draw. Bishop d7, bishop g5 check, f7. Now black immediately waits, shuttling the bishop between c8 and d7 in order to prepare e5, e6. White needs to maneuver his king left, but this is impossible because of this, which suggests a rule. The bishop must be placed where it prevents the advance of one of the pawns while simultaneously attacking the other. So it prevents this and attacks this. Okay, let's let's use the ideas from the position we just looked at to analyze other positions. Move all the pieces one rank further up. What has changed? Black to move. If bishop b4, nothing. If bishop b4, then nothing. White wins by the same exact method. Check, followed by a king outflanking. Here, both checks from g6 or b5 are equally good. After, here, bishop g6 check. King f5. And black loses because of zugzwang. Compared to the previous position, he no longer has any waiting moves with his bishop. Being at the edge of the board introduces new elements into the assessment of the position. Okay, so let's try one bishop b2. Let's try this instead. If black could follow up with a king g8 and king f8, the draw would be obvious. With the king on f8, white's only plan and outflanking to the right with the king is impossible because the board's edge gets in the way. But white to move locks the enemy king in the corner. Bishop c4. Okay, so let's say if you were to play back, now you can play here, which is much better. And now if here, then you have this little trick where it's a draw. Very nice little trick. uh, thank you, Nor. Thank you so much for being in the chat. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Okay. So let's do this one. Okay, and it's black to move. In all the endings we have so far analyzed, the defending side tried to give up its bishop for the 2 pawns. Here, the defensive plan is obviously insufficient. So, does that mean that black is doomed? As it turned out, no. The wing pawns can be stopped without recourse to a bishop stack. Bishop d1. Pawns in the crosshairs. King h4. How else can he play this if he doesn't move the king? Right? Your attack. This is also, it looks like a fishhook method as well, if you guys remember that, but not really. Is it pawns in the crosshair? Because now if he were to move here, we would take, right? So he can't do that. So he has to go here to now push here. King f7, g5, king e6, g6, king f5. White cannot advance either his king, the edge of the board gets in the way, or the h pawn. And on g7, bishop b3, on g7, bishop b3, bishop g8 blocks the enemy pawns and securely on white squares. So this is how you are supposed to draw this, bringing the king out, and then you can attack, because now this doesn't really work because of this. And if this, then okay, then we comfortably can just hello, or we can just play here where they can never get to us. If the king comes all the way over here, say like this, then we can just stay over here. And as soon as the king tries to come over here, then we can just come over here. We play on the different diagonals. Okay. And let's go over the next one. Let's look at a more complex example. If these weren't complex enough, I mean, these are pretty simple and straightforward, but you have to kind of know the strategies. Okay, so what's the idea? So remember him saying like something like this, right? If it's white to move. So black's bishop is not ideally posted. It should be on either e7 or d8. In the basic theoretical position we started with, white won easily against such a bishop. Proceeding logically, it would seem that the only one circumstance could hinder the execution of the standard winning plan, and that is the nearness of the board's edge. Let's see. According to the rules, one should first check on h5 in order to control the g6 square. Black retreats his king to e7, forcing white's king to go to the right hand outflanking, where there is little room to maneuver. Bishop h5, and then he plays king e7. Okay, and then on king e4, black does not have the same resource to prevent a left hand outflanking. Oh, sorry, king e7. King g4. Bishop b2. Bishop b2. Bishop g6. There's no other way of making progress, but now the g6 square is not available for the king. Bishop c3. King h5. Threatening here and here. Okay. Bishop g7, preventing this. Bishop h7, king f7, exclamation point. Wow. g6 check, king e7. And white cannot reach his goal of preparing f5, f6. However, white's resources for playing the win are not exhausted. We could decoy the king to g7 first, and then put the bishop on the e8, h5 diagonal, thus preparing a left hand outflanking by the king. So let's go back to the previous position. So instead of going that way, which is like how logically you're supposed to play, or like following the rules, all rules have exceptions. So king g4 first, bishop b2, h5, and then you play, h5, and then you play king g7. Okay, bishop b5, bishop c3, e8, bishop d4, bishop g6. It kind of looks like the same thing. Yeah. Bishop c3, king g4. Then bishop a5. With white's bishop on g6, he no longer has an f6 check. Bishop h5, and then finally going to the right diagonal. Wow. And black has set up the fortress draw type of this ending. That is insane. No, look at this. This is like so technical. Double exclam, bishop a5 to go to d8. Bro, I couldn't draw this. I would lose. I would lose every time. I had no idea of this defensive resource. But that is it for right now. I know I gave you guys a lot of information here, so look over the video one more time and take your time with this information. If you have any questions, leave the comments down below. If you have any suggestions, down below. If you like the video, smash it. And if you learned something, consider subscribing. It's all free lessons. Thank you guys so much, and have a good one.